Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. I'm really glad you found your way here tonight. Maybe it's been a long day. Maybe your mind is still running and you just need something calm to help it slow down. Or maybe you're the kind of person who simply likes to fall asleep thinking about something real and fascinating. Something that reminds you that the world is a little more wonderful than it sometimes feels. Either way, you're in exactly the right place. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nowhere to be. Nothing left to solve. You can let your body settle into wherever you are, let your eyes grow heavy, and let your breathing come naturally. Because tonight, we're going to explore something you do every single night of your life, and yet something that science is still only beginning to truly understand. Tonight, we're going to talk about sleep. Not just the fact of it, but the deep, strange, extraordinary world of what happens inside your brain and body when you close your eyes. We'll move gently through the science of dreaming, through the hidden work of your sleeping mind, through the quiet biology that repairs and renews you in the dark. Some of what you hear tonight might surprise you. Some of it might feel familiar in a new way. And if you happen to fall asleep somewhere along the way, that is absolutely perfect. That is exactly the point. And if these quiet journeys help you rest a little better, consider liking and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here too. One sleepy soul at a time. Now, let's begin. Sleep is not unconsciousness. It is an active, carefully orchestrated process. For most of human history, people believed sleep was simply the absence of waking, a passive shutdown, a rest from the business of being alive. But modern neuroscience has revealed something far more remarkable. Sleep is not the brain going quiet. It is the brain going to work. While you lie still, your neurons fire in complex waves. Your body releases hormones. Your immune system performs maintenance. Your memories are sorted, compressed, and filed away. Your brain washes itself clean of the metabolic waste it accumulated during the day. What looks like stillness from the outside is, from the inside, one of the most active and essential states a human being can enter. You are not simply waiting for morning. You are being rebuilt. Your brain cycles through multiple stages of sleep throughout the night. Sleep is not uniform. It is layered and rhythmic, moving through distinct stages in roughly 90-minute cycles that repeat 4 or 5 times across a typical night. Each cycle begins with lighter sleep, drifts into deeper and more restorative stages, and then rises back up into the lighter phase before beginning again. The first stage is the lightest, a gentle descent from wakefulness where the mind is still loosely tethered to the world. The second stage follows, a deeper quiet in which the brain produces brief bursts of electrical activity called sleep spindles, thought to be involved in memory consolidation. Then come the third and fourth stages, the deepest sleep, sometimes called slow-wave sleep, where the brain pulses in long, slow rhythms and the body does its most intensive repair work. And then, rising out of that depth, comes REM, the stage of dreams. Each stage has its purpose. Each one matters. And your brain moves through them all night after night with a kind of quiet precision. REM sleep stands for rapid eye movement, and it is one of the strangest states in biology. When you enter REM sleep, something remarkable happens to your eyes. Beneath your closed lids, they begin to move, quickly and erratically, darting back and forth as though watching something only you can see. Your brain becomes nearly as active as it is when you are fully awake. And yet your body is almost entirely paralyzed. Your voluntary muscles, the ones you use to move, are suppressed, held still by a chemical signal from the brainstem. Scientists believe this paralysis is protective, a way of preventing you from physically acting out your dreams. Your heart rate fluctuates. Your breathing becomes irregular. Your brain temperature rises. This is not rest in any traditional sense. It is something closer to a private theater, playing out experiences that feel absolutely real, even as your body lies completely still. Dreams happen not just in REM, but in other sleep stages too. For decades, the scientific consensus was clear. Dreaming happened in REM sleep. This seemed confirmed by the fact that people woken during REM reported vivid, narrative dreams with far greater consistency than those woken at other times. But more careful research has complicated this picture. When people are woken from deep, slow-wave sleep, many also report mental experiences. These dreams tend to be different, less vivid, less story-like, more like fragments of thought or quiet scenes than the full cinematic productions of REM. Some researchers now believe that dreaming is a continuous process that runs throughout sleep, with its character and intensity shifting depending on the stage. Even in the lightest edges of sleep, before consciousness is fully let go, the mind may already be beginning to dream. The purpose of dreams is still one of science's great open questions. Despite everything we have learned about sleep, the question of why we dream remains genuinely unresolved. There are many theories, and each carries some evidence. One theory suggests that dreams are a byproduct of memory consolidation, that the brain's process of replaying and integrating the day's experiences sometimes bubbles up into conscious experience during sleep. Another theory proposes that dreaming is a kind of threat simulation, a safe space in which the brain rehearses responses to difficult or dangerous situations. Some researchers have suggested that dreams help regulate emotion, allowing the brain to process difficult feelings outside the charged context of waking life. Others argue that at least some dreaming is essentially meaningless, a side effect of brain processes that serve other purposes. The honest scientific answer is that we do not yet know. And there is something quietly wonderful about that the thing you do every night still holds a mystery that the brightest minds in neuroscience have not yet fully unlocked. Your brain cleans itself while you sleep. One of the most striking discoveries in sleep science over the past decade involves something called the glymphatic system. Your brain is enclosed in a hard skull and surrounded by cerebrospinal fluid, a clear liquid that cushions and protects it. During waking hours, the brain is busily metabolizing, consuming energy, sending signals, making decisions. And like any metabolic process, this activity produces waste. One of those waste products is a protein called amyloid beta, which in large accumulations is associated with Alzheimer's disease. During sleep, and particularly during deep slow-wave sleep, something remarkable happens. The cells of the brain actually shrink slightly, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow more freely through the spaces between them. This fluid acts like a washing system, flushing out the accumulated metabolic waste, including that amyloid beta, and carrying it away to be filtered from the body. Your sleeping brain is not idle. It is bathing itself clean, preparing for another day of clear and effortless thinking. Sleep deprivation impairs cognitive function in ways that feel invisible to the person experiencing it. One of the most dangerous aspects of sleep loss is that it undermines your ability to judge your own impairment. Studies have shown that people who have been awake for 18 hours perform on cognitive tests in a way roughly comparable to someone who is legally drunk. And yet those same people will often report feeling fine, perhaps a little tired, but functional. This mismatch between actual performance and perceived performance is one of the reasons sleep deprivation is so insidious. A person behind the wheel who has had only 4 hours of sleep may feel confident in their ability to drive safely, while in reality their reaction times, attention, and decision-making are significantly compromised. The brain, in its tired state, loses the very capacity it would need to accurately assess how compromised it is. Adolescents are biologically wired to fall asleep later at night. If you have ever wondered why teenagers seem constitutionally incapable of going to bed at a reasonable hour, the answer lies partly in biology and not entirely in stubbornness. During puberty, the timing of the circadian clock, the internal mechanism that governs the sleep-wake cycle, shifts significantly. The release of melatonin, the hormone that signals the brain that it is time to sleep, is pushed back by roughly 2 hours. This means that a 15-year-old is genuinely not biologically ready to fall asleep at 10 in the evening in the way a younger child or an adult might be. Their body and brain are simply not signaling sleep at that time. And yet school start times in many countries still require teenagers to be awake, alert, and cognitively functional at hours that are biologically misaligned with their needs. Research consistently shows that later school start times for adolescents are associated with better grades, improved mental health, and fewer accidents. Biology, in this case, is not making excuses. It is simply telling the truth. Your body temperature drops when you fall asleep. One of the less celebrated but entirely reliable signs that sleep is approaching is a slight drop in core body temperature. As evening comes, the body begins to shed heat, diverting blood flow to the hands and feet, which causes them to feel warmer even as the body's internal temperature falls. This thermal shift is closely linked to the circadian rhythm and the release of melatonin. It is one of the body's most consistent signals that sleep time is near. This is also why sleeping in a slightly cool room tends to promote better sleep than a warm one, because it supports the natural thermal descent the body is trying to achieve. A warm bath before bed can paradoxically help you fall asleep faster, not because warmth induces sleep, but because it draws blood to the surface, and then as you get out and the warm water evaporates, your core temperature drops more rapidly, mimicking the thermal profile that the brain associates with sleep onset. Temperature and sleep are quietly in conversation every single night. Newborn babies spend about half their sleep time in a state similar to REM. In adults, REM sleep typically accounts for about 20 to 25% of total sleep time. But in newborn infants, this proportion is dramatically higher. Babies can spend roughly half of their total sleep in active sleep, the state that corresponds to what in adults becomes REM. In premature infants, the proportion is even higher still. Researchers believe this is not coincidental. The active sleep of infancy may play a crucial role in brain development, providing a kind of internal stimulation that helps the developing nervous system grow, wire itself, and establish the neural architecture that will be needed for a lifetime of thinking, feeling, and experiencing the world. Sleep, in the earliest weeks of life, may be one of the primary ways that the brain builds itself. Your memories are consolidated and reorganized while you sleep. The relationship between sleep and memory is one of the most robustly studied and consistently demonstrated findings in sleep science. When you learn something new during the day, whether a skill, a fact, a face, or a feeling, that information is initially stored in a relatively fragile, temporary form. Sleep, and particularly certain stages of sleep, appears to be essential for the process by which these temporary memories are stabilized and integrated into longer-term storage. During slow-wave sleep, the hippocampus, the brain region closely involved in forming new memories, appears to replay recently encoded experiences, replaying them in compressed form to the cortex, which gradually takes over longer-term storage. During REM sleep, there is thought to be a different kind of integration, where memories are woven together, connections are formed between new learning and older stored knowledge, and some memories may be selectively weakened while others are strengthened. The night you sleep after learning something new is not wasted time. It may be the most important processing your brain does with that new knowledge. Dreaming may help regulate emotion. Among the most intriguing theories about the function of REM sleep and dreaming is the idea that this stage serves a kind of emotional processing role. The brain during REM sleep is notable for something unusual about its neurochemistry. The norepinephrine system, which is closely associated with stress and the emotional coloring of memories, is essentially shut off during this stage. Some researchers, including neuroscientist Matthew Walker, have proposed that this creates a unique environment in which emotional memories can be reprocessed and examined without their original charged emotional weight. In other words, during REM sleep, the brain may revisit difficult or emotionally significant experiences in a state where the stress chemistry has been temporarily suspended, allowing a kind of gradual detachment from the raw emotional intensity of those memories. This theory might help explain why a night of good sleep often genuinely does make an emotionally difficult situation feel more manageable, and why sleep deprivation is so closely associated with emotional dysregulation and heightened reactivity. Sleep paralysis is a real phenomenon with a long history across cultures. Most of the time, the muscle paralysis that accompanies REM sleep and prevents you from acting out your dreams passes naturally and unnoticed as you wake. But sometimes, this paralysis lingers for a brief moment after consciousness returns, leaving a person awake but unable to move, speak, or breathe deeply, and occasionally experiencing vivid hallucinations, a sense of a presence in the room, a weight on the chest, or visual images that feel intensely real. This experience, called sleep paralysis, can be deeply frightening when it occurs. But it is also entirely benign, a brief misalignment in the timing of two systems that usually work in perfect coordination. What is remarkable is how consistently similar descriptions of sleep paralysis appear across wildly different cultures and time periods. The old hag of European folklore sitting on the chest of sleepers the Kanashibari of Japanese tradition, the nocturnal demon visitors of many world mythologies. These stories almost certainly reflect the genuine experience of sleep paralysis, interpreted through the cultural and supernatural frameworks available at the time. Science has not removed the experience. It has simply given it a different name. Blind people dream, but differently depending on when they lost their sight. Research into the dreams of blind people has revealed something interesting about the relationship between sensory experience and the content of dreams. People who were born blind or who lost their sight very early in life do not typically experience visual imagery in their dreams. Their dreams are rich in sound, touch, smell, taste, and emotion, but the visual dimension that sighted people take for granted in their dreams is largely absent. People who lost their sight after the age of roughly 5 to 7, however, often do continue to experience visual dream imagery for years or even decades afterward, and a remarkable number of people who have been blind for many years report that they still occasionally see in their dreams, even as their waking experience contains no visual information at all. Dreams, it seems, can draw on memories of seeing even when the capacity to see has long since gone. The average person spends roughly 6 years of their life dreaming over the course of a typical human lifespan. Assuming around 8 hours of sleep per night and roughly 2 hours of dreaming within that sleep, a person might spend somewhere in the region of 6 years in the dreaming state. This is not a small figure. 6 years is longer than most people spend in primary school. It is long enough to become fluent in a language, to learn an instrument, to read an enormous library of books. And yet the content of these thousands of hours of dreaming is almost entirely lost to us. The forgetting of dreams is so efficient that most people on most mornings retain only fragments at best or nothing at all. The mechanisms of this forgetting are not fully understood, but one contributing factor appears to be the low levels of norepinephrine during REM sleep, the same neurotransmitter involved in focus and memory encoding during waking life. Dreams, for most of us, are written in water. Animals dream too, and their sleeping brains show striking parallels to ours. The discovery that dreaming is not a uniquely human phenomenon came from some unexpected places. In a famous series of experiments at MIT, researchers implanted electrodes in the hippocampus of rats and mapped the neural firing patterns associated with running through a maze. When the rats later slept, they observed that the same specific patterns of neural activity replayed during sleep in compressed form in what appeared to be genuine replay of the waking experience. The rats were dreaming about running the maze. Birds have been found to replay the songs they are learning while they sleep. Octopuses, which are very distantly related to vertebrates and have entirely different brain structures, have been observed during sleep undergoing rapid changes in skin color and texture, as if experiencing vivid visual scenes. Dogs and cats, most pet owners will have noticed, twitch, paddle their legs, and occasionally vocalize during sleep in ways that strongly suggest they are running or chasing something in their dreams. The capacity to dream appears to be ancient, embedded in nervous systems that evolved long before the human mind existed. Your sleeping brain filters sensory information without switching off entirely. Sleep is not a state of total sensory shutdown. While the threshold for information to reach conscious awareness rises significantly during sleep, the sleeping brain continues to monitor the environment for signals that might be relevant or threatening. Parents sleeping through loud noise will sometimes wake instantly at a soft cry from their infant. A person can sleep undisturbed through the noise of traffic they are accustomed to, but wake in response to a less loud but unfamiliar sound. People who have learned to pay attention to their own name will often show a neural response to hearing their name spoken during sleep, even when they do not wake. The sleeping brain is not offline. It is selectively attending, standing a quiet watch over the world, deciding moment by moment what matters enough to warrant waking. Napping has genuine cognitive benefits when done correctly. A brief nap of around 20 to 30 minutes has been shown in multiple studies to improve alertness, mood, and cognitive performance, with effects that can last for several hours. The key to a beneficial nap is timing and duration. Napping for too long risks falling into slow-wave sleep, which can leave you feeling groggy and disoriented upon waking, a phenomenon sometimes called sleep inertia. Napping too late in the afternoon can interfere with nighttime sleep by reducing what researchers call sleep pressure, the biological drive to sleep that builds throughout the day. But a well-timed short nap taken in the early afternoon, roughly 6 to 8 hours after waking, seems to hit a sweet spot. Notably, some cultures have practiced midday sleep as a normal part of daily life for centuries. The siesta, far from being an indulgence, may be a reasonable accommodation to a natural dip in alertness that occurs in the early afternoon, independent of lunch as part of the circadian rhythm. The chronotype, whether you are a morning person or an evening person, is largely genetic. The preference some people have for mornings and others have for evenings is not simply a matter of habit or lifestyle choice. It reflects genuine biological differences in the timing of circadian rhythms. This biological preference, known as chronotype, is partly heritable and appears to be influenced by variants in multiple genes. Morning types, sometimes called larks, have circadian clocks that run slightly fast, making them naturally alert in the early hours and ready for sleep in the early evening. Evening types, sometimes called owls, have clocks that run slightly slow, shifting their peak alertness and their natural sleep onset toward later in the day. Neither type is wrong. Both are normal variants in human biology. But in a society built largely around early start times, evening types frequently find themselves living in a kind of chronic misalignment with their biology, a state that researchers have called social jet lag. Sleepwalking most commonly occurs during deep slow-wave sleep. Despite its dramatic appearance in films and folklore, sleepwalking is most often a fairly quiet affair. It typically occurs during the deepest stages of non-REM sleep, when the brain's motor systems become active while higher conscious awareness remains largely suppressed. A sleepwalker may sit up, stand, walk around, and even perform fairly complex behaviors, all without any genuine awareness or later memory of having done so. Waking a sleepwalker is not dangerous, contrary to popular belief, though it may be disorienting for them. Sleepwalking is more common in children than in adults, and most children outgrow it. It tends to run in families, suggesting a genetic component. Stress, sleep deprivation, and fever can trigger it in those who are predisposed. The sleepwalking brain is in a curious hybrid state, asleep and yet capable of movement, acting in the world while the mind remains largely elsewhere. Lucid dreaming is a genuinely documented phenomenon that some people can learn to induce. In a lucid dream, the dreamer becomes aware that they are dreaming while still remaining in the dream state. This is not merely waking up. It is a shift in the dreamer's awareness such that they know the experience they are having is a dream and often gain some degree of ability to influence its content. Lucid dreaming has been scientifically verified in a clever series of experiments in which trained lucid dreamers agreed to signal to researchers using prearranged eye movements when they achieved lucidity. The signal was detected on the eye tracking equipment, confirming that the person was both dreaming and self-aware. Brain scans of lucid dreamers show that the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with self-awareness and executive function, shows elevated activity compared to normal dreaming states. Lucid dreaming appears to be a genuine hybrid of sleep and wakefulness, and while some people experience it spontaneously, there are techniques that may help others learn to achieve it. Sleep deprivation affects different brain regions differently. Not all cognitive functions are equally vulnerable to sleep loss. Research has shown that the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for judgment, planning, impulse control, and the regulation of emotion, is particularly sensitive to sleep deprivation. This means that among the first capacities to deteriorate with inadequate sleep are exactly those that might help a person recognize and respond appropriately to the fact that their cognition is impaired. Emotional regulation also suffers early, with sleep-deprived people showing significantly heightened reactivity to negative stimuli in brain imaging studies. Basic sensory and motor functions, by contrast, tend to be more resilient in the short term. This pattern has real-world implications. A tired person may still be able to perform a routine task adequately while being much less capable of handling an unexpected complication, managing an interpersonal conflict calmly, or exercising good judgment about a risk. The sound of a snore can exceed 80 decibels. Snoring is one of the most commonly reported sleep disturbances, affecting a substantial proportion of the adult population and the partners who sleep beside them. It is caused by the vibration of soft tissue at the back of the throat as air passes through a narrowed airway during sleep. When muscle tone in the throat relaxes during sleep, as it does for everyone to some degree, the tissues can partially obstruct the flow of air and vibrate against each other, producing that familiar rasping sound. Some snoring is essentially harmless if socially inconvenient. But heavy, frequent snoring can be a sign of a more serious condition called obstructive sleep apnea, in which the airway actually collapses repeatedly during sleep, briefly stopping breathing and causing the sleeper to rouse, often without awareness, dozens or even hundreds of times per night. Sleep apnea is associated with significant health consequences if untreated, including elevated risk of cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and cognitive impairment. Certain animals sleep in ways that seem almost impossible by human standards. The world of animal sleep contains some genuinely astonishing adaptations. Migratory birds such as the alpine swift have been tracked on flights lasting months without landing, and studies of their brain activity suggest they can sleep while flying, with one hemisphere of the brain sleeping while the other remains awake, a phenomenon called unihemispheric sleep. Dolphins and many other cetaceans also practice unihemispheric sleep, keeping one eye open and one hemisphere active to maintain awareness of their environment, including the need to surface and breathe. Walruses can go without sleep for many days during migrations and then make up the lost sleep when they rest. Giraffes in the wild sleep for only about 4.5 hours per night, often in short increments. The brown bat, by contrast, sleeps for around 20 hours out of every 24. Sleep appears to be universal among animals, but the form it takes is remarkably varied, shaped by the pressures and requirements of each species' ecology. The feeling of falling while drifting off to sleep has a name and a fairly interesting explanation. Many people experience a sudden muscular jerk, often accompanied by a vivid sensation of falling or stumbling just as they are on the edge of sleep. This is called a hypnic jerk or a sleep start. It is extremely common, experienced by the majority of people at some point, and is generally harmless. The precise cause is not entirely settled, but one widely held theory suggests that as the brain begins the transition into sleep and muscle tone drops, the brain may briefly and incorrectly interpret this as the beginning of a fall, triggering a reflexive motor response. Some researchers have also suggested a possible evolutionary origin related to the postural vigilance required for sleeping in trees. Whatever its origin, the hypnic jerk is a vivid reminder that the transition from wakefulness to sleep is not a clean switch but a process, a gradual letting go that the brain sometimes resists at the last moment. Light is the most powerful regulator of the circadian clock. The human body runs on an internal clock with a natural period of approximately 24 hours, but this clock requires regular calibration to stay synchronized with the actual cycle of day and night. The primary signal for this calibration is light, specifically the blue wavelength light that predominates in natural daylight. Specialized cells in the retina called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells respond to this light and send signals directly to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, a small region of the hypothalamus that serves as the master clock of the circadian system. Morning light suppresses melatonin and advances the clock, signaling that the active phase of the day has begun. The absence of light in the evening allows melatonin to rise, signaling that the sleep phase is approaching. The invention of artificial light, and more recently the screens that emit blue wavelength light into our faces in the hours before bed, has introduced a powerful but evolutionarily novel stimulus that can disrupt this finely tuned system, delaying melatonin onset and pushing the clock toward later wake and sleep times. Some people can function on significantly less sleep than the average person, and this appears to be genetic. The recommended sleep duration for adults is generally between 7 and 9 hours, and research consistently shows that chronic restriction below this range is associated with negative health outcomes. But a small proportion of the population, estimated at perhaps 1 to 3%, appears to genuinely function well on 6 hours or less of sleep without experiencing the cognitive or health consequences that would affect most people under the same conditions. Studies of these natural short sleepers, as they are sometimes called, have identified mutations in specific genes related to sleep regulation, including variants in the December 2nd gene that appear to increase the efficiency of sleep. These individuals are not, as they sometimes claim, simply people who have trained themselves to need less sleep. They are people whose biology is genuinely different. For most people, the belief that they can function normally on 5 or 6 hours of sleep is a misperception, a cognitive blind spot created by the very impairment they cannot accurately assess. The smell of certain foods and places can appear in dreams. While the dream world is primarily visual for sighted people, all of the senses can contribute to dream experience. Smell is particularly interesting in this context because the olfactory system has a more direct anatomical relationship with the emotional and memory centers of the brain than any other sense. The amygdala, which processes emotional responses, and the hippocampus, which is central to memory formation, both receive direct input from the olfactory system without the kind of thalamic relay that visual and auditory information passes through. This direct connection may partly explain why smells are such powerful triggers for memory, and it may also contribute to the way familiar smells can occasionally appear in dreams, carrying with them the emotional and memory associations of a place, a person, or a time. A dreamer may find themselves back in a place not by seeing it, but by something that feels like smelling it, an olfactory ghost from the past that the sleeping brain has quietly retrieved. Sleep changes dramatically across the human lifespan. The quantity, quality, and structure of sleep change substantially from birth to old age. Newborns sleep between 16 and 18 hours per day. Through childhood, total sleep time gradually decreases, and the proportion spent in active dreaming sleep falls as the brain matures. Adolescence brings the circadian shift toward later sleep timing that we explored earlier. Adults generally settle into a pattern of 7 to 9 hours, though the distribution of sleep stages shifts subtly over the decades, with slow-wave deep sleep gradually declining and sleep becoming lighter and more fragmented. By late middle age, many people find that sleep is lighter, that waking in the night is more common, and that the ability to return to sleep may take longer. Older adults also tend to shift back toward earlier sleep and wake times. These changes are a normal part of the biology of aging, though they are often experienced as a worsening of sleep quality, and they can sometimes be addressed with attention to sleep hygiene and light exposure. Dreaming may involve the emotional brain in ways that promote long-term well-being. The amygdala, the brain's threat and emotion detector, is highly active during REM sleep, significantly more so than during waking or during non-REM sleep. This elevated activity during the dreaming phase is thought to be connected to the emotional processing function of REM sleep. Dreams often feature emotionally significant scenarios, revisiting experiences, relationships, and concerns from waking life. But they reframe them in ways that can be surprising, sometimes incorporating them into wildly different contexts, sometimes placing familiar emotional situations in entirely unfamiliar settings. This creative recombination may be part of how the brain works through the emotional significance of events, testing them against other memories and experiences, and gradually reducing their raw emotional charge. People who successfully process emotionally difficult events tend to show changes in the way those events are represented in both memory and effect over time. And sleep, it appears, plays a meaningful role in that processing. The white noise of a fan or a steady sound can genuinely help some people sleep. Silence is not always the best environment for sleep. For many people, background noise of the right character, steady, consistent, and unobtrusive, actually promotes better sleep by masking the kind of sudden, variable sounds that the sleeping brain tends to flag as potentially significant. Traffic, conversation, the creak of a settling house, these acoustic events draw the sleeping brain toward wakefulness. A consistent background noise, sometimes called masking noise or white noise, reduces the contrast between these intrusive sounds in the background, making them less likely to register as signals worthy of attention. The effect is not universal, as some people genuinely sleep best in silence, but for those whose sleep environments are prone to variable noise, a fan, a white noise machine, or a steady natural soundscape can create a more stable acoustic baseline that the brain learns to settle into. The content of dreams is influenced by waking life, but not in a simple or predictable way. The relationship between what we experience in waking life and what we dream about is real but indirect. Freud famously proposed that dreams are the disguised fulfillment of unconscious wishes. Modern neuroscience has moved well away from this framework, but the basic observation that waking experiences influence dream content has held up. There is even a named phenomenon called the day residue, the tendency for specific elements of the previous day's experiences to appear in dreams that night. What the brain does with these residues, however, is far from a simple playback. Dreams tend to combine elements in novel ways, place them in unexpected contexts, and charge them with emotions that may or may not match their original context. The dreaming brain is not a recording. It is an editor, a composer, a storyteller working with the material of a life to produce something that follows its own strange internal logic. Your immune system is heavily influenced by sleep. The relationship between sleep and immune function is intimate and bidirectional. Sleep deprivation impairs immune response, reducing the production of cytokines, the signaling proteins that help coordinate the body's response to infection, and diminishing the activity of natural killer cells. Studies have shown that people who slept fewer than 7 hours per night were significantly more likely to develop a cold when exposed to the rhinovirus than those who slept 8 hours or more, even after controlling for other factors. In the other direction, illness tends to make us sleep more, a response that appears to be actively orchestrated by the immune system through the release of cytokines that promote sleep. Sleep and immune function have co-evolved over millions of years into a deeply intertwined partnership. The hours of sleep you give yourself are, among many other things, hours you are giving your immune system to do its work. Some people report regularly experiencing hypnagogic hallucinations as they fall asleep. In the borderland between wakefulness and sleep, a state sometimes called hypnagogia, a substantial proportion of people occasionally experience vivid, often visual hallucinations. These might be fleeting images, geometric patterns, faces, landscapes, or brief scenes that seem to arise from nowhere, unbidden and often surprising. They are typically brief and dissolve quickly as consciousness either retreats further into sleep or pulls back toward waking. Some people also experience brief auditory hallucinations in this state, hearing their name called, a snatch of music, or a voice speaking. These experiences are entirely normal and reflect the partial disengagement of the sensory cortex from external input before the consolidation of full sleep. Many creative and inventive people have reportedly harnessed this state deliberately, sitting in a chair with a spoon in hand so that when they drifted into sleep and the spoon fell, the noise would wake them at the threshold of the hypnagogic state, hoping to capture ideas from the border of dreaming. Regular sleep schedules are associated with better metabolic health. The timing of sleep matters not only for cognitive function and mood, but also for metabolic regulation. The body's production and sensitivity to insulin, the hormone that regulates blood sugar, fluctuates according to the circadian rhythm. Eating, exercise, and sleep at times misaligned with the internal clock, as occurs in night shift workers, frequent travelers crossing time zones, or people with highly irregular schedules can disrupt these metabolic rhythms with measurable consequences. Studies of shift workers show elevated rates of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease compared to day workers, even when total sleep time is equated. The consistency of sleep timing, going to sleep and waking at roughly the same time every day, appears to be an underappreciated component of metabolic health, working in parallel with diet and exercise to keep the body's biochemical rhythms aligned. The first few minutes after waking can feel disorienting because the brain needs time to fully transition from sleep. The grogginess and slight confusion many people feel immediately upon waking, especially from deep sleep, has a name: sleep inertia. It reflects the fact that the transition from sleep to wakefulness is not instantaneous. The brain requires a period ranging from a few minutes to, in some cases, nearly half an hour to fully shift its activity back into waking mode operation. During this time, prefrontal function, the cognitive capacity most associated with clear thinking and decision-making, may still be somewhat impaired. For most people, morning coffee, light exposure, and the simple act of movement and activity accelerate this transition. But the experience of lying awake and feeling as though the mind is moving slowly through something thick is not an illusion. It is a genuine physiological state that will pass, as it always does, with the returning light of day. And now, gently, we approach the end. You have traveled through the science of something you do every night, something that is at once entirely ordinary and quietly extraordinary. You have learned that sleep is not a pause in living, but one of its most essential activities. That your brain, while you lie still, washes itself, reviews your memories, processes your emotions, rehearses what you have learned, and maintains the intricate biological machinery that allows you to think and feel and move and connect. You have learned that dreams are real and strange and still not fully understood, that the sleeping brain is active and purposeful and sometimes mysterious, that the hours you spend unconscious are anything but wasted. And now, perhaps, you are closer to sleep than when we began. Your thoughts may already be loosening their edges, becoming less precise, drifting gently toward that border where one kind of experience gives way to another. Let them drift. There is nothing that needs solving tonight. nothing that cannot wait until morning. Your brain will do what it has always done, what billions of years of evolution have shaped it to do perfectly. It will carry you through the stages, from the lightest edges to the deepest quiet, and back up again, and back down, and through the world of dreams, and back to the dark, cycling softly through the night, doing its work, keeping you whole. Let your breathing slow a little more. Let your body feel heavy and warm and safe. You are exactly where you need to be. The science is done. The learning is finished. What comes next is rest. Deep, clean, necessary, ordinary, extraordinary rest. Let it come. You already know how. You've always known. Good night. The suprachiasmatic nucleus is only about the size of a grain of rice, yet it governs almost everything about your daily rhythms. Nestled deep within the hypothalamus, this tiny cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons receives direct input from the light-sensitive cells of the retina and uses that information to synchronize nearly every system in the body to the 24-hour cycle of the rotating Earth. It coordinates the timing of hormone release, body temperature fluctuation, digestive activity, immune function, cardiovascular output, and the sleep-wake cycle itself. Every cell in your body carries its own molecular clock, a loop of interacting proteins that oscillates on a roughly 24-hour period, but these peripheral clocks require ongoing signals from the suprachiasmatic nucleus to stay synchronized with each other and with the external world. Remove a hamster's suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it will lose all rhythmic patterns of activity, sleeping and waking at random with no internal structure. Restore it, even from a donor hamster with a different natural cycle length, and the recipient will adopt the donor's rhythm. This tiny grain of tissue is not a passive timekeeper. It is the conductor of the biological orchestra. Coffee and caffeine work by blocking the brain's sleep pressure signals, not by adding energy. The feeling of tiredness that builds throughout the day, and that is so powerfully relieved by a cup of coffee, has a specific biological mechanism. A chemical called adenosine accumulates in the brain as a byproduct of neural activity throughout the waking day. As adenosine levels rise, it binds to receptors in the brain that progressively signal the need for rest, creating what researchers call sleep pressure, the mounting biological drive toward sleep. Caffeine works by binding to these same adenosine receptors without activating them, effectively blocking adenosine's access and preventing the sleep pressure signal from being received. The result is not more energy in any fundamental sense, but rather the temporary suppression of the signal that would otherwise tell you how tired you are. The adenosine, meanwhile, continues to accumulate. When the caffeine is eventually metabolized and clears from the receptors, the adenosine rushes back in and the tiredness that was merely masked returns, often with some additional force. This is the chemistry of the caffeine crash, and it is entirely predictable. The dreaming mind can sometimes compose music, solve problems, and generate creative insights that the waking mind could not. Throughout history, a remarkable number of creators and scientists have reported receiving significant insights, ideas, or creative work through the medium of dreams. The chemist Auguste Kekulé described arriving at the ring structure of benzene after dreaming of a snake biting its own tail. Paul McCartney claims that the melody of yesterday came to him fully formed in a dream. Dmitri Mendeleev reportedly saw the arrangement of the periodic table in a dream. Mary Shelley traced the central image of Frankenstein to a hypnagogic vision on the edge of sleep. These anecdotes are impossible to verify with certainty, and the dreaming brain did not, of course, operate in isolation from years of waking thought. But they point to something that is supported by controlled research as well. Certain stages of sleep, particularly the lighter stages in the transition into and out of sleep, appear to facilitate the kind of loose, associative thinking that can draw unexpected connections between distantly related concepts, a cognitive mode less available during the focused, goal-directed processing of waking life. There is a period of natural waking that many people experience in the middle of the night, and it was once considered entirely normal. Before the Industrial Revolution and the widespread adoption of artificial lighting, the dominant pattern of sleep in many parts of the world may not have been the consolidated 8-hour block that we now consider standard. Historical records from England, France, and other parts of pre-industrial Europe, as well as anthropological observations of contemporary communities living without artificial light, suggest that a biphasic sleep pattern was common. People would sleep for several hours after dark, wake naturally in the middle of the night for a period of an hour or two, and then sleep again until morning. The middle of the night waking period was a time for quiet reflection, conversation, intimacy, or prayer. It was not considered insomnia or a sign of any disorder. If you are someone who wakes regularly in the small hours and lies awake for a while before returning to sleep, you may simply be expressing a biological sleep pattern that is older than the 8-hour schedule by centuries. The pineal gland, a small cone-shaped structure in the center of the brain, produces melatonin in darkness. The pineal gland has a long and somewhat storied history in the annals of human thought. Descartes famously identified it as the seat of the soul, the point at which the immaterial mind communicated with the material body. The reality, while less mystical, is still quite remarkable. The pineal gland is one of the few structures in the brain that does not maintain the blood-brain barrier's usual strict separation from the general circulation. It receives signals from the suprachiasmatic nucleus reflecting the state of environmental light, and it uses those signals to regulate the production and release of melatonin. In darkness, the pineal gland begins secreting melatonin into the bloodstream, signaling to the body that night has come and sleep should follow. In light, particularly in the blue wavelength light that characterized natural dawn, melatonin production is rapidly suppressed. Melatonin is not a sleep drug in the direct pharmacological sense. It is a signal of time, a chemical darkness that tells the body where it is in the daily cycle. Sleep talking or somniloquy is extremely common and tends to emerge from non-REM sleep. Sleep talking is one of the more socially consequential sleep behaviors, at least from the perspective of the person sharing a bedroom with a sleep talker, but it is also one of the most benign. Research using laboratory recordings has found that somewhere between 60 and 65% of people report having talked in their sleep at least once, and a smaller but still substantial proportion do so regularly. Sleep talking tends to occur most often during the lighter stages of non-REM sleep, particularly stages 1 and 2, and less commonly during the deeper stages or during REM sleep, where the vocal apparatus, like the rest of the voluntary musculature, is more thoroughly suppressed. The content of sleep talking is often unintelligible or fragmentary, but can sometimes be surprisingly coherent, including responses to questions spoken by a person nearby, a phenomenon that researchers have recently begun studying more formally. Despite the coherence that sometimes appears, sleep talkers are not genuinely aware or responsive in any meaningful sense. They are operating in a kind of intermediate state between sleep and waking. The quality of sleep is influenced by what you eat and when you eat it. The relationship between diet and sleep is more complex and bidirectional than is often appreciated. Alcohol, while it may seem to promote sleep by causing drowsiness and shortening the time it takes to fall asleep, actually significantly disrupts sleep architecture later in the night. It suppresses REM sleep in the first half of the night, and then, as it is metabolized and its central nervous system depressant effects wear off, can cause rebound arousal and fragmented sleep in the second half. Heavy meals close to bedtime can also interfere with sleep by requiring digestive activity that may raise body temperature and stimulate the digestive system at times when the body would otherwise be settling toward rest. Conversely, going to bed hungry can also disrupt sleep. Some research suggests that foods with a high glycemic index consumed a few hours before bed, or foods containing tryptophan, a precursor to both serotonin and melatonin, may slightly promote better sleep, though the effects are modest. The relationship is real but not simple, and individual variation is considerable. Humans are the only mammals that deliberately delay sleep. Across the animal kingdom, the pattern is consistent. When an animal is tired, it sleeps. When it is not tired, it does not. The biological drive to sleep is acted upon naturally and without resistance. Humans are unusual, possibly unique, in our capacity to override this drive for social, professional, or recreational reasons. We stay up late watching screens, finishing work, socializing, or simply because we are not yet ready to stop. This deliberate interference with the sleep drive is enabled by our uniquely developed prefrontal cortex, the region that allows us to override immediate biological urges in service of longer-term goals or social norms. It is a remarkable capacity in many ways, but it is one that we frequently use against our own interests. The ability to choose to stay awake is not the same as the ability to do so without consequence. The biology does not care about the deadline or the television program. It simply accumulates the debt and waits. Paradoxical sleep is another name for REM sleep, coined because the brain activity during this stage looks so much like wakefulness. When researchers in the 1950s first began recording brain electrical activity with electroencephalography during sleep, they were surprised to discover that during certain periods of sleep, the brain produced wave patterns that looked strikingly similar to the patterns seen during alert wakefulness. This seemed paradoxical, a brain that appeared active in a body that was clearly asleep. The resolution to this paradox came gradually as the full picture of REM sleep emerged, the eye movements, the muscle paralysis, the connection to dreaming. But the original observation that the sleeping brain can generate patterns indistinguishable from the waking brain remains one of the most striking facts in all of sleep research. The line between sleep and waking is not always where it appears to be from the outside. Deep slow-wave sleep is when the brain's electrical activity is most synchronized across large regions. During the deepest stages of non-REM sleep, the brain's electrical activity takes on a characteristic pattern of slow, high-amplitude waves visible in electroencephalography recordings as long, sweeping oscillations cycling at around half a hertz or less. In this state, large populations of neurons across the cortex shift together between periods of activity and periods of silence, producing the synchronized pattern that appears as a slow wave. The degree of synchronization during slow-wave sleep is one of the defining features that distinguishes deep sleep from lighter stages and from waking. This synchronized activity is thought to be important for the consolidation of certain types of memory and for the restorative cellular processes that characterize deep sleep. Interestingly, slow-wave activity decreases with age, and the reduction in deep sleep that many older adults experience is reflected in a measurable decline in the amplitude and abundance of these slow oscillations. The brain during REM sleep shows reduced activity in regions associated with logical thinking and self-reflection. Brain imaging studies comparing REM sleep to waking have found a consistent pattern of reduced activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the region most closely associated with logical reasoning, planning, critical evaluation, and the kind of reality monitoring that allows us to question whether our experiences are real. This reduction in prefrontal activity during dreaming may partly explain why dream narratives, however bizarre or internally inconsistent, are so rarely questioned by the dreamer in the moment. The brain systems that would ordinarily flag implausibility or impossibility as worthy of investigation are quiet. We accept a flying elephant or a conversation with someone long dead or the sudden presence of a childhood home in an unfamiliar city without a flicker of skepticism, because the brain circuitry that generates skepticism is temporarily offline. This is also why lucid dreaming, which requires a partial restoration of self-monitoring awareness during the dream, is associated with increased prefrontal activity compared to ordinary dreaming. The amount of sleep a person needs varies genuinely between individuals. Sleep research has established population-level recommendations, 7 to 9 hours for adults, more for children and adolescents. But within these ranges there is genuine individual variation that is not simply a matter of habit or preference. Some people perform optimally with 9 hours of sleep. Others do equally well on 7. This variation appears to reflect real differences in the efficiency of sleep stages, in the rate at which sleep pressure builds and dissipates, and in the basic biological requirements of different nervous systems. The danger is in assuming that because someone else functions well on less sleep, you will too. The brain of a natural short sleeper is genuinely different from the brain of someone who sleeps 6 hours by choice. For most people, the benchmark is simple and reliable. If you can sleep without an alarm clock and wake feeling rested, you are probably getting the sleep your body needs. If you reach for the alarm, rely on caffeine, and feel sleepy in the early afternoon, you are probably not. Some researchers believe we may be living through a global epidemic of insufficient sleep. The modern world has in many ways been architecturally hostile to good sleep. Artificial light extends the perceived day. Work and social obligations compress the available hours. Electronic devices place stimulating, blue light-emitting screens into the hours before bed and sometimes into the bed itself. Caffeine consumption masks the signals of accumulated sleep debt. Cultural narratives in many societies, particularly in certain professional contexts, have long valorized short sleep as a marker of toughness, dedication, or productivity. Researchers who study population-level sleep patterns have documented a significant reduction in average sleep duration over the past century and a consistent association between inadequate sleep and a remarkably wide range of health and social outcomes. Accidents, medical errors, mental health conditions, metabolic disease, immune dysfunction, diminished academic performance, and increased mortality risk have all been linked to insufficient sleep in large epidemiological studies. If sleep were a new drug that produced all of the benefits that adequate sleep produces, it would almost certainly be considered one of the most effective health interventions ever discovered. The sleeping brain can respond to external sounds and even incorporate them into dreams. The boundary between the outside world and the dreaming mind is permeable in ways that are sometimes surprising. Sounds that occur during sleep can be incorporated into the content of dreams, woven into the narrative as if they were part of the internally generated experience. A dripping tap can become rain. An alarm can become a phone ringing in a dream. A person's name spoken aloud can appear within a dream as a character calling out. Brain imaging has shown that the sleeping brain is not simply filtering out all external information, but is selectively processing it, integrating some of it into the ongoing dream experience and discarding the rest. This permeability has practical implications. It is part of why consistent background sounds can promote sleep by reducing the unpredictability of the acoustic environment. And it is part of why sudden or emotionally meaningful sounds are so effective at waking us, even from relatively deep sleep. The science of sleep medicine is relatively young, and much remains to be discovered. The formal scientific study of sleep began in earnest only in the 1950s with the development of polysomnography, the comprehensive monitoring of physiological signals during sleep. Before this, the sleeping body was largely inaccessible to scientific observation. In the decades since, the field has grown enormously, developing treatments for sleep disorders, mapping the neurological and molecular mechanisms of sleep regulation, uncovering the breadth of sleep's influence on health, and beginning to probe the deep question of what sleep is ultimately for. And yet, by any honest reckoning, we are still early in this work. The function of dreaming remains genuinely uncertain. The mechanisms by which sleep loss leads to disease are incompletely understood. The full range of individual variation in sleep need and architecture has not been mapped. The relationship between sleep and consciousness itself raises questions that touch on some of the deepest puzzles in neuroscience and philosophy. Sleep is one of the most universal features of animal life, and it remains one of the most mysterious. Nightmares are more common in the early morning hours when REM sleep is longest and most intense. The structure of sleep across the night means that the proportion of REM sleep rises progressively with each successive cycle. The first REM period of the night is typically short, perhaps 10 to 15 minutes. By the final cycle before natural waking, REM periods can extend to 45 minutes or longer. This is why disturbing dreams tend to cluster in the later part of the night and in the early morning hours, because it is during these extended REM periods that the more intense and emotionally vivid dream experiences are most likely to arise. It is also why sleep disruption in the second half of the night, whether from noise, an early alarm, or waking anxiety, can disproportionately reduce REM sleep and leave a person feeling less emotionally resilient and more reactive during the following day. The architecture of the night is not uniform, and the distribution of sleep stages across it has real consequences for how the following waking hours feel. Certain medications and substances dramatically alter dream frequency and vividness. Many common medications exert significant effects on dreaming, sometimes in ways that their primary users are entirely unaware of. Beta blockers, used to treat hypertension and heart conditions, can increase the frequency of vivid and disturbing dreams. Antidepressants that work on the serotonin system, particularly the SSRIs that are among the most widely prescribed medications in the world, tend to suppress REM sleep and with it dreaming, which is one reason some people on these medications report a marked reduction in dream recall. When people stop taking REM-suppressing medications, there is often a period of REM rebound in which dreaming becomes unusually intense and frequent as the brain compensates for the previous suppression. Nicotine patches worn through the night are well documented to produce vivid and often unusual dreams because nicotine activates cholinergic receptors that play a role in REM regulation. Many recreational substances also alter sleep architecture in ways that users may not appreciate, often with cumulative effects that outlast the acute intoxication. The loss of a single night's sleep creates measurable changes in brain structure visible on imaging. A landmark study published in 2019 found that healthy adults who were kept awake for one night showed increased concentrations of tau protein in the blood, a biomarker associated with Alzheimer's disease, suggesting that even a single night of sleep loss interferes with the brain's clearance mechanisms in a measurable way. Other studies have shown that one night of total sleep deprivation produces detectable changes in emotional brain reactivity, cognitive performance, and even the apparent integrity of certain white matter tracks as measured by advanced neuroimaging. The cumulative evidence from this line of research suggests that the brain is not simply inconvenienced by poor sleep. It is physiologically altered by it, and these alterations begin with the very first night of insufficient rest. The good news embedded in this same research is that recovery sleep can reverse many of these effects. The brain is remarkably resilient, but it requires the time and the conditions that allow it to repair. The science of chronobiology, the study of biological time, is one of the fastest growing areas in medicine. The recognition that virtually every system in the human body operates on a 24-hour rhythm has transformative implications for medicine, far beyond the obvious connection to sleep. The timing of medication administration can significantly affect its efficacy and its side effects, a field of study called chronopharmacology. Cancer chemotherapy, blood pressure medications, anti-inflammatory drugs, and many others have been shown to have significantly different outcomes depending on the time of day they are administered. Surgical outcomes, vaccine responses, and even the results of physical testing can all vary according to where in the circadian cycle they occur. The fact that virtually all clinical trials in medical practice have, until recently, ignored the dimension of time is beginning to be recognized as a significant oversight. The Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 2017 was awarded for the discovery of the molecular mechanisms controlling circadian rhythms, a recognition of how fundamental this dimension of biology is proven to be. Some people with certain neurological conditions can act out their dreams in ways that sometimes predict future disease. A condition called REM sleep behavior disorder occurs when the usual muscle paralysis of REM sleep fails to engage properly, allowing a person to physically act out the movements and behaviors of their dreams. Affected individuals may punch, kick, shout, or move dramatically during sleep, and the content of their movements often corresponds to the dream narrative they later describe. They may report dreaming of being chased, fighting, or running, and their bed partner observes exactly these motor patterns. This condition is notable for reasons beyond its immediate effects. Research has shown that REM sleep behavior disorder is strongly associated with subsequent development of neurodegenerative conditions, particularly Parkinson's disease and related disorders, in a substantial proportion of cases. The underlying pathology may damage the brainstem circuits that normally suppress movement during REM sleep before it affects other systems. In this sense, a disruption in the mechanism of dream paralysis can sometimes be an early window into neurological changes that will not be fully apparent for years. Children who regularly get adequate sleep perform significantly better academically and emotionally. The relationship between sleep and academic performance in children is one of the most consistently documented findings in developmental psychology. Children who sleep well show better attention, working memory, emotional regulation, and behavior in school settings. Conversely, children who are chronically sleep-deprived show deficits in these same areas that can be mistaken for other conditions, including attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. The overlap between the behavioral profile of a sleep-deprived child and a child with ADHD is significant enough that some researchers have called for routine sleep assessment before an ADHD diagnosis is pursued. Bedtime routines, consistent sleep schedules, dark and cool sleeping environments, and appropriate limits on stimulating screen use in the hours before bed are among the evidence-based recommendations for improving children's sleep. The investment of attention to a child's sleep habits is among the highest return interventions available to parents and educators. The experience of time during dreams is distorted in ways that are still not fully understood. One of the persistent popular beliefs about dreaming is that it occurs in an instant, that a dream which feels as though it lasted for hours was actually compressed into the few seconds before waking. This idea was partly inspired by the apparent speed of the final REM period before an alarm sounds, but careful research has largely failed to support it. Studies in which participants were trained to signal the passage of specific time intervals during dreams, using pre-agreed eye movements during lucid dreaming, have found that the subjective experience of time during dreaming corresponds reasonably well with objective clock time. A dream that feels as though it lasted 10 minutes probably did take approximately 10 minutes of REM time. What is genuinely strange, however, is that the sleeping brain's sense of temporal sequence, the before and after of narrative time within a dream, can be dramatically nonlinear. Dreams can shift backward and forward through time, present different versions of the same event simultaneously, or construct scenarios that feel temporally coherent but would be logically impossible in waking experience. Time in dreams follows rules that are simply different from the rules of waking. The transition to sleep and from sleep involves changes across dozens of neurotransmitter systems simultaneously. Sleep is not orchestrated by a single chemical signal. It is the result of a coordinated shift across multiple interacting neurochemical systems. As sleep approaches, the activity of the ascending arousal systems that maintain wakefulness, including neurons that release norepinephrine, serotonin, histamine, and acetylcholine, begins to decline. A region called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus becomes active and releases inhibitory signals, effectively quieting the wake-promoting systems. As sleep deepens, further changes occur in the balance of neurotransmitters that shape the character of each sleep stage. The cholinergic system, which uses acetylcholine as its transmitter, is particularly active during REM sleep and is thought to play a central role in generating the dreaming brain state. The adenosine accumulation we discussed, the signals from the circadian system, the temperature changes, the hormone shifts, these are all part of an interlocking system that evolved over hundreds of millions of years to orchestrate the transition between waking and sleeping with extraordinary reliability, night after night, for every night of a human life. Nighttime light exposure from screens suppresses melatonin in ways that vary by wavelength. The effect of light on the circadian system is not uniform across the spectrum. The retinal cells most sensitive to light in terms of circadian regulation contain a photopigment called melanopsin that is maximally responsive to short wavelength blue light in the range of around 480 nanometers. This is roughly the wavelength that predominates in blue skylight during the middle of the day. The screens of smartphones, tablets, and laptops emit significant quantities of light in this wavelength range, which means that using these devices in the hours before bed can deliver a signal to the brain's circadian system that is analogous, in biological terms, to an exposure to daylight. The resulting suppression of melatonin can delay sleep onset and shift the circadian clock toward a later phase. Various technological solutions exist, including blue light filtering software and glasses, and while these can reduce but not eliminate the effect, the simplest approach, avoiding bright screen use in the 2 hours before bed, remains the most effective. The biology was not designed for a world in which the most compelling entertainment device also delivers a sunrise signal at midnight. Many people experience a brief moment of awareness at the exact point of sleep onset. If you pay close attention on the edge of falling asleep, you may occasionally notice a very brief and peculiar experience, a moment of awareness that seems to hover at the precise threshold between waking and sleep. A thought that begins in ordinary waking consciousness and then shifts, subtly but unmistakably, into something less anchored, less linear, more imagistic. A sensation that you are about to lose the thread of waking awareness. Sometimes, this threshold crossing is accompanied by the hypnic jerk we discussed earlier, a muscle twitch that briefly pulls consciousness back to the surface. Other times it passes smoothly and unnoticed, and by the time it has occurred, there is no longer anyone fully present to observe it. This threshold is what researchers sometimes call sleep onset, the moment at which the brain's electrical patterns cross from the irregular high-frequency activity of wakefulness into the slower, more organized patterns of stage 1 sleep. It is one of the few thresholds in biology that the person crossing it sometimes observes, at least partially in real time. Ancient humans likely had different sleep patterns than modern people. The evidence from studies of contemporary forager communities living without access to electricity offers a window into the sleep patterns that may have been characteristic of human life before artificial light. Researchers studying groups including the San in Africa, the Tsimane in Bolivia, and the Hadza in Tanzania have found several consistent patterns. Average sleep duration in these groups tends to fall between 6.5 and 7.5 hours per night, somewhat less than current health recommendations for industrial populations. Sleep onset tends to occur several hours after sunset rather than immediately after dark. Wake time tends to coincide closely with sunrise. These populations also tend to show lower rates of insomnia despite the absence of the behavioral sleep hygiene measures that are promoted in industrialized contexts. The data suggest that the human sleep system evolved to operate in close synchrony with the natural light-dark cycle, and that many of the sleep difficulties common in modern industrial societies may be partly a consequence of the ways in which artificial light and irregular schedules have disrupted this alignment. The feeling of a dream being on the tip of your tongue, almost remembered but not quite, reflects the fragility of dream memory during waking transitions. Dream memory is notoriously volatile. Many people report waking with a vivid sense that something important or interesting happened in their dream, and yet being unable to retrieve any specific content. This frustrating experience reflects something real about the neuroscience of dream memory. The brain states associated with optimal memory encoding, including adequate norepinephrine levels and hippocampal activity appropriate for long-term consolidation, are specifically suppressed during REM sleep. Dreams are generated in a state that is neurochemically poorly suited to their own preservation. When waking occurs slowly and naturally, there is a transitional period during which dream content that is still in short-term, recently generated form can sometimes be captured before it dissolves. But the transition to full wakefulness, with its return of norepinephrine and its orientation to the waking environment, typically erases the fragile dream traces within minutes. Writing or speaking the content of a dream immediately upon waking, before fully sitting up or engaging with the demands of the day, is the most reliable method of preserving it. Sleep serves different restorative functions at the cellular level compared to the organ level and the psychological level. The restorative functions of sleep operate simultaneously across multiple scales of organization. At the cellular level, sleep is associated with increased synthesis of proteins and repair of DNA damage. The metabolic rate of many tissues decreases, reducing the generation of potentially harmful reactive oxygen species. Cellular processes involved in immune function, including the production of antibodies and the activity of natural killer cells, are enhanced. At the organ level, the heart rate and blood pressure drop, reducing cardiovascular workload. The endocrine system shifts its activity, with growth hormone released in large pulses during deep slow-wave sleep, orchestrating tissue repair and maintenance across the body. The kidneys regulate fluid balance differently during sleep. Even the gut microbiome, the community of microorganisms in the digestive system, appears to follow circadian rhythms that are disrupted by irregular sleep. At the psychological level, the emotional processing and memory consolidation we have discussed occur. These levels are not independent. They are aspects of a single, interlocking restorative process that evolution has compressed into the hours of stillness that the sleeping body provides. Sleepy people make riskier financial and moral decisions. The relationship between sleep and decision-making extends beyond simple cognitive tasks into the more complex territory of judgment under uncertainty. Studies have shown that sleep-deprived individuals tend to be more optimistic about potential gains and less sensitive to potential losses in financial decision-making scenarios, a shift in risk tolerance that may reflect the impairment of prefrontal oversight. Sleep loss also affects moral judgment, with tired individuals showing altered patterns of response to ethical dilemmas, and in some studies showing diminished sensitivity to the moral dimensions of decisions compared to well-rested controls. The implications of these findings are sobering in contexts where important judgments are made by people who may be chronically sleep-deprived, including medical professionals after long shifts, financial traders, and policymakers working under sustained pressure. The decisions made in a state of fatigue are not simply slower or less precise versions of the decisions that would be made when rested. They reflect a qualitatively different cognitive and emotional stance toward the world. Some researchers have proposed that sleep serves a function of synaptic homeostasis. One influential theory about why sleep is necessary, known as the synaptic homeostasis hypothesis, proposes that waking activity progressively strengthens synaptic connections throughout the brain as new information is encoded and new associations are formed. This widespread synaptic potentiation, while useful for learning, comes at a metabolic cost and potentially reduces the signal-to-noise ratio in neural circuits if not periodically reset. Sleep, in this theory, provides the opportunity for a broad downscaling of synaptic strength, selectively weakening connections that were enhanced during waking while preserving the relative differences between stronger and weaker connections that represent learned information. This renormalization of synaptic weights is thought to restore the metabolic and cellular resources needed for another cycle of waking learning. And it may also explain why performance on newly learned skills sometimes improves after a night of sleep, as the broader pattern of neural activity becomes clearer once the overall synaptic gain has been reduced. Jet lag is a mismatch between the internal clock and the external environment, not simply tiredness. The discomfort of jet lag is not just fatigue from a long journey. It is the experience of a biological clock that is out of synchrony with the local environment, still running on the time zone that was left behind. Because the circadian clock can only shift its timing by roughly 1 to 2 hours per day in response to light cues, crossing multiple time zones in a few hours creates a mismatch that takes days to fully resolve. The direction of travel matters. Eastward travel requires the clock to advance, moving toward earlier sleep and wake times, which tends to be more difficult because the circadian system is naturally set slightly longer than 24 hours, making it easier to delay than to advance. Westward travel requires a delay, which is usually easier. The consequences of jet lag extend beyond drowsiness and disrupted sleep. Performance is impaired, digestion is disrupted, mood can suffer, and for very frequent travelers, there are questions about the longer-term health effects of repeatedly subjecting the body to circadian disruption. The way we wake up affects our mood and cognitive performance for hours. Waking abruptly from deep sleep to a loud alarm is one of the least physiologically kind ways to start the day. The shock of sudden awakening from deep, slow-wave sleep is associated with significant sleep inertia, the grogginess and impaired performance we discussed earlier, and can elevate cortisol and adrenaline in a way that sets a somewhat stressed physiological tone for the early morning. Waking naturally at the end of a sleep cycle when sleep has already lightened tends to produce a gentler transition and a more positive morning experience. Some alarm technologies attempt to approximate this by monitoring movement and waking a person during a lighter stage of sleep within a window before the alarm time. Light-based wake systems that gradually brighten a room to simulate sunrise can trigger a natural increase in cortisol before waking, priming the body for alertness before the eyes open. These approaches reflect a growing understanding that how we wake matters, and that the first experience of the day is partly set by the final moments of the night. The relationship between sleep and creativity has been documented across many fields. Beyond the anecdotal stories of dreams producing creative breakthroughs, experimental research has demonstrated links between sleep and creative problem-solving in controlled settings. In a well-known study, participants were given a mathematical task that had a shortcut that could dramatically reduce the time needed to solve it, but the shortcut was not obvious and had to be discovered. After a period of initial training, participants who slept before being tested were roughly 3 times more likely to have discovered the shortcut than those who remained awake for the same period. The researchers proposed that sleep allowed for the insight to emerge through a process of unconscious restructuring of the problem's representation. Other studies have shown that REM sleep in particular is associated with enhanced ability to find associations between distantly related concepts, the kind of lateral, non-obvious connecting that underlies much creative thinking. The sleeping brain is not idle. It may be quietly rearranging the furniture of what you know to reveal connections that direct, effortful thinking cannot easily reach. Very brief periods of sleep called microsleeps can occur in drowsy people without their awareness. When a person is severely sleep-deprived or even moderately drowsy, the brain can sometimes enter sleep for periods of just a few seconds at a time, episodes so brief that the person may not notice them. These microsleeps are particularly dangerous in situations requiring sustained attention, such as driving. During a microsleep, the visual system may remain technically open but is processing no useful information. The hands remain on the wheel. The foot remains on the pedal, but the brain is briefly offline. Even a 2-second microsleep at highway speed covers a significant distance without any conscious control. Research has shown that drowsy driving is responsible for a substantial proportion of road accidents, and that people are very poor judges of their own drowsiness. The feeling of confidence that one is still alert and capable of safe driving can persist right up to the moment of a microsleep. This is part of why sleep researchers and road safety authorities consistently rank drowsy driving alongside impaired driving as a serious public safety concern. The human sleep drive has 2 interacting components known as Process S and Process C. Sleep researchers have proposed a 2-process model of sleep regulation that has proven highly influential in explaining patterns of sleepiness, alertness, and sleep architecture. Process S represents sleep pressure, the homeostatic drive for sleep that builds continuously during waking as adenosine accumulates, and that dissipates during sleep as adenosine is cleared. Process C represents the circadian component, the internal clock signal that modulates alertness and sleepiness in a pattern tied to the time of day regardless of how much sleep has recently been obtained. These two processes work in opposition and in coordination. In the morning, the circadian signal for alertness rises to counteract the residual sleep pressure from the night. Through the day, sleep pressure continues to build, but the circadian alerting signal keeps it at bay. In the evening, the circadian signal begins to fall, and the accumulated sleep pressure tips the balance toward sleep. It is the interaction of these two processes that creates the characteristic human pattern of consolidated sleep at night and wakefulness during the day, and it is disruptions to either process that underlie many common sleep problems. The architecture of a night's sleep can be read in a polysomnogram, and the patterns carry significant clinical information. Polysomnography is the comprehensive recording of physiological activity during sleep, measuring brain electrical activity through electroencephalography, eye movements through electrocalligraphy, muscle tone through electromyography, heart rhythm, breathing patterns, oxygen saturation, and sometimes limb movements and body position. The resulting record, a polysomnogram, allows a trained clinician to precisely characterize the structure of a night's sleep, identifying the timing and duration of each sleep stage, the presence and frequency of arousals, the occurrence of breathing abnormalities, and the pattern of limb movements. This information can diagnose conditions ranging from obstructive sleep apnea to periodic limb movement disorder to REM sleep behavior disorder to narcolepsy. The patterns visible in a polysomnogram often carry information that the sleeper themselves is entirely unaware of. A person who believes they have simply always been a light sleeper or always felt tired regardless of how much they sleep may be shown, through this objective record, that there is a specific and potentially treatable disruption occurring in their sleep architecture every single night. There is evidence that humans and other animals have evolved to sleep more deeply in safe environments. The depth and quality of sleep appear to respond to perceived safety in ways that make intuitive evolutionary sense. Sleeping is a time of significant vulnerability. An animal deeply asleep is not monitoring its environment for predators or competitors, not capable of rapid flight and potentially exposed. The pressure to sleep deeply enough to obtain the essential restorative functions must therefore be balanced against the risk of sleeping so deeply in an unsafe location that threat response is compromised. In humans, research suggests that people sleep more lightly in unfamiliar environments, a phenomenon sometimes called the first night effect, in which one hemisphere of the brain maintains a higher level of vigilance during the first night in a new location. Perceived safety, the sense of being in a secure and familiar place, seems to promote deeper and more restorative sleep. This may partly explain why people often sleep worse when traveling, during periods of high stress, or in circumstances of instability. The brain's risk assessment system does not fully switch off during sleep. It modulates the depth of sleep according to its best estimate of how safe it is to be deeply unconscious. Sleep in mammals is under significant genetic regulation. The many ways in which sleep varies between individuals and species reflects the extent to which sleep regulation is under genetic control. Studies of twins have shown that many aspects of sleep, including its timing, duration, stage architecture, and even the character of EEG patterns during specific sleep stages, are significantly heritable. Genome-wide association studies have identified dozens of genetic variants associated with sleep duration, chronotype, insomnia risk, and restless leg syndrome. The molecular mechanisms underlying the circadian clock are made up of specific genes whose products interact in a feedback loop, and mutations in these genes produce dramatic effects on circadian timing. The period gene, whose mutations can cause dramatically advanced or delayed sleep-wake timing in humans, was first identified in the fruit fly Drosophila, in which mutations cause flies to have abnormal activity rhythms. The fundamental molecular clockwork of circadian regulation has been so conserved through evolution that fly genetics provided the first window into human circadian biology. The clock that tells you when to sleep is written in DNA that has been running for hundreds of millions of years. Dreams in which you cannot run, scream, or move effectively are among the most commonly reported dream themes across cultures. If you have ever dreamed that you were trying desperately to run from something and found your legs moving impossibly slowly, or that you were trying to scream and no sound came out, you are in very large company. These themes rank among the most universally reported dream experiences in surveys across diverse cultures and geographic regions. The precise reasons for their prevalence are debated. One possibility relates to the actual physiological state of the body during dreaming, in which muscle tone is broadly suppressed and genuine motor commands are blocked. The brain's partial awareness of this suppressed motor output may be integrated into the dream narrative as the experience of being unable to move effectively. Another interpretation draws on the emotional content of such dreams, which often occur during periods of stress or anxiety and may reflect the dreamer's waking sense of helplessness, constraint, or being overwhelmed by circumstances. Whatever their origin, these familiar failed action dreams are a reminder that the dreaming mind is deeply human, reaching across cultures and continents to tell the same strange stories in the dark. The science of sleep is ultimately the science of what it means to be conscious and alive. At its deepest level, the study of sleep touches on questions that go far beyond biology. What is the relationship between the sleeping brain and the waking mind? Why does consciousness persist in a modified form during dreaming, but largely dissolve during dreamless sleep? What is the nature of the self that wakes each morning, and how continuous is it with the self that fell asleep? These questions live at the intersection of neuroscience, philosophy, and the most basic human experiences of being alive. Sleep research has not answered them, and may not answer them within our lifetimes, but it has given them new depth and new precision. It has shown us that consciousness is not a binary state, that the boundaries between waking and sleeping are more permeable than they appear, that the sleeping brain is a complex and purposeful system rather than a machine at rest. Whatever sleep ultimately is, it is not the absence of experience. It is a different mode of experience, a different way of being built into the fabric of what we are. Insufficient sleep is associated with increased caloric intake and weight gain. The hormonal consequences of inadequate sleep extend into the regulation of appetite and energy balance. Two hormones play a central role. Ghrelin, which signals hunger and promotes food intake, rises with sleep deprivation. Leptin, which signals satiety and suppresses appetite, falls. The result is a double effect in which a tired person feels more hungry and is slower to feel full. Studies that experimentally restrict sleep in controlled settings consistently find increased caloric intake, with a particular tendency toward palatable, calorie-dense foods. Sleep-deprived individuals tend to snack more, especially in the late evening, the brain region most closely associated with reward, and the hedonic value of food shows heightened responses to food stimuli when subjects are sleep-deprived. These findings do not mean that sleeping more is sufficient to produce weight loss, but they do suggest that chronic insufficient sleep creates a genuine biological headwind against the maintenance of healthy weight, independent of willpower or dietary knowledge. Certain sleep disorders are far more common than most people realize. Insomnia, broadly defined as difficulty initiating or maintaining sleep or waking too early, occurring at least 3 times per week and causing daytime impairment, affects a substantial proportion of the adult population. Estimates vary depending on the definition used, but many surveys suggest that between 10 and 30% of adults experience chronic insomnia symptoms. Obstructive sleep apnea, in which the airway collapses repeatedly during sleep, disrupting breathing and sleep architecture, is thought to be significantly underdiagnosed, with many people experiencing the condition for years without being aware of it. Restless leg syndrome, a neurological condition characterized by uncomfortable sensations in the legs and an irresistible urge to move them, particularly in the evening and at night, is estimated to affect between 5 and 15% of the adult population. Narcolepsy, a condition involving dysregulation of the sleep-wake switch and characterized by sudden intrusions of sleep-like states into wakefulness, affects fewer people but can be severely disabling. The aggregate burden of sleep disorders on individual well-being and public health is substantial, and recognition and treatment rates remain inadequate. The sleeping brain prioritizes certain types of memories over others for consolidation. Not all memories are treated equally by the sleeping brain. Research has revealed a sophisticated selectivity in the consolidation process, in which emotional significance, novelty, and relevance appear to influence which memories are prioritized for stronger encoding during sleep. Emotionally charged memories, whether positive or negative, tend to be consolidated more robustly than neutral ones. Memories that the brain has tagged as potentially important, either because they were accompanied by strong emotion or because they were learned in a context that signaled their significance, are more likely to survive the night and emerge strengthened the following day. Motor skills, including newly learned physical sequences, are consolidated primarily during a specific phase of light non-REM sleep called Stage 2, with sleep spindles appearing to play a particular role. Declarative memories, facts, and events are consolidated through a different mechanism involving replay in the hippocampus during slow-wave sleep. The sleeping brain is not a passive archive. It is an active editor, making choices about what to keep and what to let fade. Temperature regulation is partly suspended during REM sleep. In most sleep stages, the body continues to regulate its temperature through sweating, shivering, and changes in blood flow. But during REM sleep, the hypothalamic control of temperature regulation is largely suspended, leaving the body effectively poikilothermic, meaning unable to actively regulate its own temperature and instead dependent on the ambient environment. This is why a very cold or very hot sleeping environment disrupts REM sleep in particular. Without the active thermoregulatory mechanisms, the sleeping body cannot compensate for extremes of temperature. The evolutionary logic of this suspension is not entirely clear, but it may be connected to the overall suppression of voluntary motor activity during REM, as temperature regulation through shivering and sweating involves muscular activity that might conflict with the paralysis of the dreaming state. Whatever its origin, this temperature sensitivity of REM sleep is one reason that sleeping environment temperature matters so much for dream-rich, restorative sleep. Some scientists believe that a universal function of sleep is still waiting to be discovered. Despite the impressive progress of sleep science over recent decades, a genuine consensus on the single most fundamental function of sleep remains elusive. The honest position held by many researchers is that sleep likely serves multiple overlapping functions simultaneously, and that it may be a mistake to seek a single unifying purpose. Memory consolidation, metabolic waste clearance, synaptic renormalization, immune enhancement, emotional processing, cellular repair, hormonal regulation, each of these appears to be a genuine function of sleep. But the question of whether there is one function that is so fundamental that all the others are secondary to it, or whether sleep is truly multifunctional in a way that evolved piecemeal over hundreds of millions of years, remains open. What is clear is that every animal species that has been studied carefully sleeps in some form, and that the selective pressure to continue sleeping despite the significant vulnerability it creates must reflect something of extraordinary importance. We simply do not yet know with certainty what that one most essential thing is. Your sleeping body still produces subtle rhythmic movements that you are almost certainly unaware of. Even during the deep paralysis of REM sleep and the quiescent stillness of slow-wave sleep, the sleeping body is not entirely without movement. Swallowing occurs regularly. Brief postural adjustments redistribute pressure across the body surface, preventing the tissue damage that would occur from prolonged pressure on a single point. The eyes move during REM, as we have discussed. During non-REM sleep, small movements of the limbs and trunk occur at intervals. Breathing creates a steady rhythmic movement of the chest and abdomen. The heart beats. The gut quietly continues its peristaltic rhythm. Even at its most still, the sleeping body is a landscape of subtle, persistent motion, a set of overlapping rhythms maintaining the conditions of life while consciousness is elsewhere. The stillness of a sleeping person is a surface impression. Beneath it, the body is quietly at work. The cultural rituals surrounding sleep and bedtime have deep roots in human history. Human societies have always attended to the transition into sleep with ritual and preparation. The practice of saying prayers before sleep, the bedtime story, the checking of locks and the securing of the household, the specific arrangements of sleeping space and sleeping companions, the use of particular sounds, scents, or objects to signal the approach of sleep, these behaviors appear across enormously diverse cultures and historical periods. They reflect something real about the psychological requirements of the sleep transition. Sleep requires the letting go of vigilance, the yielding of the monitoring that characterizes wakefulness. Ritual serves this transition by providing a sequence of familiar, predictable steps that progressively signal safety and the appropriateness of relaxing that vigilance. The bedtime routine of a child, structured and consistent, is a technology evolved across generations for precisely this purpose. And the instinct many adults feel to perform certain preparations before bed, to check particular things, to arrange their environment in particular ways, reflects the same underlying need to signal to the nervous system that the conditions for safe unconsciousness have been established. Polyphasic sleep, in which sleep is distributed across multiple periods rather than one consolidated block, is natural for some life stages. In early infancy, sleep is distributed across many short periods throughout the 24-hour cycle, gradually consolidating toward a biphasic and then monophasic pattern over the first months and years of life. Many elderly people return to a more distributed pattern, with nighttime sleep supplemented by daytime napping. And as we discussed, pre-industrial populations may have commonly practiced a biphasic pattern of sleep divided across 2 nighttime periods. In most healthy adults in industrial societies, sleep is consolidated into a single nighttime period, and this is what current sleep medicine considers the normative pattern. But the history of human sleep and its patterns across the lifespan suggests that consolidation into one unbroken block is not the only healthy way to sleep. The body's flexibility in distributing sleep time is a reflection of the evolutionary adaptability of the sleep system to different environmental conditions and demands. And now, at last, we have arrived at the place where the words should stop. You have traveled far tonight through the science of the thing that is already happening or beginning to happen around you and within you, through the rhythms that govern the hours of darkness, through the stages that the brain moves through as quietly as a tide, through the strange country of dreaming and the deep quiet of dreamless sleep, through the biology that repairs you, the chemistry that marks the hours, the ancient evolutionary inheritance that you carry in your cells. None of it required your management tonight. All of it was already in motion, already prepared, already patient. Your body has been waiting for this moment all day. The adenosine has been building. The temperature has been falling. The melatonin has been rising. Everything that needed to happen has been happening quietly, reliably, exactly as it has happened for every night of your life. There is nothing left to think about, nothing left to solve. The facts have been given and received. The science is done. Let the thoughts drift now, loose and unhurried, until they simply stop arriving. Let the darkness behind your eyelids become a kind of depth, not empty but restful, soft, spacious. Let your breathing slow to whatever pace it finds on its own. You are held. You are safe. You are already on the way. If you are still awake, feel free to let the next chapter begin. But if sleep has found you, then everything has gone exactly as it should. Sleep well. Good night.